So please join me in welcoming Mario Field, GIS consultant with New Light Technologies, here to give insights on enterprise address management. Mario, the stage is yours.
Hi, thank you. Glad to be on here. Go ahead and go to the first slide, please. So today I want to talk about enterprise address management, and initially I want to build on Maggie's idea that place is personal. An address can identify a place, and while it's personal to you, an address allows others to know the place that is at, for your place. And so go ahead and to the next slide. So when you talk about enterprise address management, there are actually multiple components that feed into actually, having an address in the GIS and users being able to access that data and use it for their own particular purposes. The first one is obviously a database. The important part of the database, though, is that it's a single source of truth for addresses and associated features, and it serves as the official source. So a organization, typically a local government, will know where the official addresses and the related information is for that, as opposed to having multiple address sources spread across several departments or organizations and having to figure out having differences and dedupe and things like that. So the database is probably the critical aspect of this. Also, they're map layers. So addresses have a geospatial component, and map layers feed into not only displaying and helping users with addresses and orientation, but it also goes into the actual address management. There's a deep linkage between addresses and street center lines, and those are typically at least the two first map layers that are incorporated into an address management system. There's also a maintenance application. So when an organization builds a official repository of addresses, there has to be a way for the organization to update the addresses and keep the reference address database up to date, and so it doesn't age and then all of a sudden have to do another project to update it from a particular timestamp. There's also a web viewer, so it's a simpler interface than maybe a GIS desktop software that allows for not only internal but potentially the public to be able to look at address layout and even look at their own address information. And then another critical component is a MAR is not self-contained within its own silo. It is meant to be used by other systems. It's meant to be applying the same address across different applications. Example could be utility billing, permitting, things like that. Next slide, please. So what is an address? Address is a collection of information presented in a fixed format or a text string, and it's used to identify a specific location. And so as you can see in this map, as you drill down into the neighborhood, it goes right to a point location that has an address, and it typically refers to a building, apartment, plot of land, and things like that. And it contains the number, the name, the apartment, and as well as regional identifiers such as the city, state, and zip code, and in some cases also the country. Next slide. So why do they matter? Well, first off, many know their address, so it immediately is an identifier that this is where I live, this is where I work, this is where a relative lives, and things like that. So it's a common piece of information that is shared across within a family or friends or whatever, and it allows, at least at that level, for people to be able to identify, be able to go and locate and things like that. So that's where it connects people, places, and services. It's critical and used extensively in local government. In the case when I worked for DC government, we were using it for 911 routing. That was probably the most important aspect of addresses, but we were also using it for city service requests. So if there was somebody that had an abandoned property next to them or an abandoned vehicle, trash pickup, things like that, the address was the identifier that connected the constituent with the government organization. And it was critical that Department of Public Works or Department of Transportation or 911, when that address was entered in, that it also had the correct location for whatever services were being done. So it is very important at the local government level. It's fundamental in applications that I spoke about. Obviously, mail, logistics, being able to route, transport a set of goods. One of the early things in GIS was networking and being able to construct an optimized route for services, and addresses typically what's the base component of that. Next slide, please. So talking about the reference database, that's the first component of it. It serves as a single source of truth for a verified geolocated address. And having that one record makes it a lot very easy so that there are not multiple, it doesn't start propagating out to multiple databases. It's one that the owner or the person that's at that place and service providers and other people agree that on the address information. So it's a unique common tie. It's also very useful for revenue. So obviously there's a special importance in being able to address things for being able to collect certain revenue for whatever the services are. And it provides consistency. So if there's a referential database across systems and applications, such as what I shared, such as 911 and service requests, it improves and provides more efficiency in the service delivery. Next slide, please. So the database component, it's not just a feature class or a map layer that has a set of attributes. It's actually a lot of interconnected tables building off the main table is the address table that has the basic address components, but from there emanate other tables. One example would be a lookup table for the street type that would have boulevard, street, avenue, and whatever. Instead of that necessarily being stored with each address, that breaks out. So as you loop out, there are units and there are a whole bunch of more intricate pieces that make up the address, but ultimately the database, when everything is put in there, it then serves and can be manipulated and structured in ways that are useful to whatever the use case is. But also complementary to that is building the map layers, such as what you see here in a community, and being able to utilize geospatial technology to do particular, whatever the use case or application is that requires an address. Next slide, please. Also with that is a management application. Management applications are the ones that allow users. One example is federated management. So you could have multiple organizations, multiple users that are responsible for addressing. I'll get into an example of that in a few slides down the road. But it's basically a tool, be it on a desktop, be it a web interface, however it works. The bottom line is that it serves as the gateway, and usually there's an address manager or something along those lines that is kind of the gatekeeper to make sure that because the MAR is a referential database, that the information that gets entered in there as they're updating, adding, retiring, modifying addresses, that all of it follows whatever the protocols and the rules are within an organization, and that the data that's entered into it is as trustworthy as when the database first was stood up. Next slide, please. So what happens here with the maintenance application is now the way it can be structured is you can start developing certain workflows. In this example, it kind of talks about the different components. So you have the technical aspect. That's where you're actually manipulating the address information through a desktop tool, web interface, however it presents itself. And usually address maintenance is also coupled with street centerline, although street centerline usually is outside of the purview of whoever's maintaining the addresses, because street center lines also serve as a transportation network and have additional application uses that are on top of what addresses are. But there is a certain component where the street center line, especially like the street names that are tied to addresses, they have to be synchronized up. So there's a technical aspect of it, but there's also the administrative, especially within an enterprise approach where you have multiple organizations or people that are responsible for addresses. You can set up different access points, different roles, so to speak, so that you could have a read-only, you could have an editor that's actually responsible for the address, and then you can have a reviewer, for instance, like the gatekeeper I talked about, that has the privileges needed in order to make sure that when the product, which represents an address point or a street center line edit, is put into the database and it's as trustworthy as the information that's also in there. And so when it gets utilized in the various use cases and organizations, it doesn't disrupt their workflow, and that it keeps everything current. Next slide, please. So the final step is, working all these days and doing all these tasks to get an address repository together. It provides little value unless you share it and you integrate it across multiple applications. And in this case, I'm using a local government example, again, citing utilities, permits, 911, and service requests. There are more examples. These are just a couple that I pointed out. The way it's done is typically through web services or a application programming interface, but there's also map layers and views that are built within the database itself. So of critical importance is, not only collecting and storing the address information, but building things that feed off of that central database that makes sharing across different applications. Could be Salesforce, could be another particular software, and being able to allow that software, and given its particular structure and requirements, being able to allow it to integrate with the master address repository in a fluid and easier way. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about a couple of examples. The one I'm most familiar with is Washington, D.C. The part of Washington, D.C. I want to talk about is the integration component. And MAR2 API, that large screenshot of the address, that's a simple address viewer where you can type in an address and it provides basic information for the address. It also provides information on what ward it's in, what other geographies, be it political or physical or whatever. There's also geographies that can be stored with that. That is one of the applications that was built off a web service that was kind of a wrapper for API calls. And in this case, by building a web service off of the API, and in this case, it's just simply submitting an address string to the master address repository, and then it feeds back information. But this allows easy integration, and this was one that we built and really promoted when Department of Public Works or Child and Family Services Agency, or one of the many other DC government departments that we really wanted them to use the MAR, and we wanted to make it easier for them to do that. And one of the ways was building something off of the API and then offering it documentation, some support, things like that, to make integration within whatever system or application that they're doing easier. Next slide, please. The next one is Wake County, North Carolina. They are they have people moving in. So they are in maintenance mode. They've invested a lot of resources into building a centerline network and creating 680, well, it's more now. It's probably over 700,000 address points. And so they need a way to do that. However, they have 15 jurisdictions that are within the county. City of Raleigh is probably the most prominent one. But having that many jurisdictions, they have to have a maintenance application that allows for an enterprise approach to address management and being able to edit addresses and allowing each jurisdiction that has a partial area within the map that you see on the right to be able to do their own address management, but allow a framework where they're not actually committing the address to the official database, but they're more of submitting it and doing the work that's required to submit a address for review. And there's still in this case, Wake County is responsible for the addressing across its jurisdiction. So it goes back to the Wake County addressing staff for them to review. But there's a whole coordination effort and a whole architecture in the background. They're on an Esri platform, Oracle database, and this is something that, this use case, they have to be able to do maintenance with it. Final example, please. Next slide. And then in this case, I want to talk about, this is a project that currently working on partnering with Spatial Focus. We're doing addressing for the U.S. Virgin Islands. And in this case, I wanted to highlight the life cycle. So it's not just, having a database and doing integration, but it's, what are all the components that need to happen before you actually start addressing, an implementation plan, being able to know what's the current landscape within addressing, what's the current landscape of how people are using addresses or referring to addresses, building an address referencing system. So an example of an address referencing system in DC is the quadrants, and having a center point that basically says, from this point, east, west, north, south, they define the quadrants. And so it serves as a referential starting location when you do addresses and start from 0 to, alternating 1, 2, 300, all the way up to whatever the highest address range would be. Also providing an address manual, and then there has to be a way to assign addresses. And in this case, and in many cases, their field work has to be done. People have to go out into the field, walk every street, walk almost every structure, whether they assign an address or discover what the address is. That's one of the ways. Another one is if there's already address databases, but there's many of them, there can be a data reconciliation, integration type of effort done as well. And then we pick up to what I talked about before, the database, the maintenance tools, and then of course there's always training and ongoing support that needs to happen. And that is probably the last slide. And I look forward to, as well, answering questions during the open discussion.